All right, hello everyone. We're on this beautiful landscape. Ocean's over there, mountains are behind. And so I'll do my best to find a good view for us. I brought Leia so you can do her little cameo. And we're gonna enter into, and I have All You Need Is Love. Love, it says love again on it. We're going to enter into George MacDonald's book, this book called Sir Gibbie. So welcome if you're just coming here. Make sure to like and subscribe and all of that stuff, because then it gets the video out to other people. George MacDonald was C.S. Lewis's spiritual mentor, and so he said that every book he ever wrote, C.S. Lewis is the one that was best friends with Tolkien and wrote the Narnia books, the Narnia Chronicles. All right, and so he said every book he ever wrote, he quoted either directly or indirectly this guy, George MacDonald. And so, whoa, one of the sluts fell out of this bench, so I forgot. I almost slipped through. So I go to different places in nature for us and enter into this book from the 1800s. Now, I am a psychologist in my day job, so you might ask, why are you doing this? And it's just, sometimes we get lost in our own head and our own dynamics. And when we read a story, the story helps transform us. I call it God, right? You can not believe in God, but I believe that there's a creator that created all of this beautifulness. And that the creator will just remind us of different times, just like, why was Jesus so wise? And he didn't just teach knowledge, he taught wisdom in parables, so that the parables will come up for you in your everyday life, so that you're not bound or trapped in your old patterns. So you actually, you get freed. And all you need is love. Well, I could just sit here and show you my t-shirt for an hour, or we can enter the story that, if Christ is our good shepherd, then it's like God created other creative people. That's one of the aspects. We're made in the image and likeness of God. So we are creative. And through our creations, other people can find more healing and find life and find vibrancy and break out of these old patterns that keep us not in our power, not in our authority, not in our friendship and love relationships with other people. They all these old patterns and just programming from childhood blocks us from that. And I don't want anyone to be blocked, and I don't want to be blocked. So I was just going to read this because, of course, God leads me. And then there's a butterfly, right? That's like the transformation that takes place. It's called theosis. We're meant to go from one state to another. We're all designed to do that, but not everyone takes up. Do you see the butterfly? 2 butterflies. Oh, wow. Here's another one. Hopefully I got this one so you can see. This is the transformation I'm talking about. Like a butterfly looks like all it is a caterpillar until it gets wound up in the cocoon, and it has to break out of that cocoon. All right, God created other animals for us to see the process that's meant to take place in us, that he will do in us if we say yes. You have to say yes. Like my friend Elliot sang this song. Say yes. Anyway, you don't have to say yes, but if you want this, you do. It's like if I want to drink this water, I have to say yes and open my mouth and drink it. I can't just see it and go, yes, I want that, and not drink of it. We're meant to drink of these things and for them to be active in our lives. So I invite you to do that. And that's what we're going to do here. We're entering in. I have a mic now, so there's no excuses about my sound. Leia's resting. It's a beautiful day. I try to make this timeless, so I never say what time it is of the year, because it's the same always in California anyway. It's funny. I mean, sometimes I wear a sweatshirt. All right. I don't think we're going to finish today, but maybe. But even if we don't, just trust that you're here for a reason. And bikers and hikers come up this path. So if they interrupt us, they're just part of this journey. All right. We're on this chapter. Okay, so we're in this book, Sir Gibbie. I do this so that other people listening to the podcast can just, or watching, can just see where we're actually starting. I have a playlist of this if you want to start from the beginning. Just start listening while you're walking. I listen to Lord of the Rings all the time when I'm hiking because they're always walking on that. Anyway, life is a journey anyway. So we're on this chapter called Needful Odds and Ends. And so, hi. There's butterflies still playing. Maybe you'll see it in the background. All right. I forget I can sit apart away from this because I have this mic. So Gibbie is mute, but he can do the hand signs now. He does the alphabet and he spells things out for Donald, his adopted brother. He was adopted by Donald's family. So what will you do when you are a minister? Asked Gibbie on his fingers. I'm going to go back a little bit from last time. Me, a minister, echoed Donald. Me, a minister, he repeated. Losh, man. It's lucky if I can save my own soul. It'll be all I'm fit for. I don't know how I would hail a congregation of other folks. Nah. Maybe I could be a schoolmaster and help the bairnies to be good, like the little kids, right? Baron. A little good. He speaks Scottish. Okay, so here's that. I'm going to skip it because I don't want to start with all that. I read it last time, but that's where we are. Okay, and so we're on this other side. I remember usually I stop on this side, but we're over here. But wouldn't you like to have a wife, Donald, and children like your father and mother? Spelt Gibbie. Nah. No wife for me, Gibbie, answered the philosopher. What would have either a pure schoolmaster or a shepherd? Who would have, I think he's saying who, except it me be some lass like my sister Nicey, and wouldn't know Euclid from her nose. Like Nicey doesn't know, her sister doesn't know Euclid. Or Burns from a mill dam, or conic sections from the hole in the Great Pyramid. I don't like you here to talk like that, Donald, said Gibbie. What do you say to Mother? The mother's not to be said about, answered Donald. She's one by herself, and one like no other folk. Their mom is just such a beautiful person. I can't wait if you haven't listened yet. You hear her. George MacDonald, like I think C.S. Lewis quoted George MacDonald somewhere else, but I quote this quote all the time about Sir Gibbie's mom. Well, the mother, Donald's mom that adopted Gibbie. George MacDonald says something earlier in this book. He says, a real mom isn't mother just to her kids, but mother to the whole world, right? It's just like this feminine nature. Even if you don't have kids, it's picking up on this being. A mom nurtures a baby in her belly, and it grows and is formed and is birthed out. And so we all can be like that, men and women, when we're creative. We're nurturing this dream and this idea that God put in us, this creative idea. And we're being kind to ourselves, but persevering and relentless. You know, there's the masculine and the feminine working together. Because if you look at Adam and Eve, they said Eve came out of Adam, right? It says a rib, but some people say the Hebrew for that is his side. God pulled Eve out of Adam, formed her out of Adam. And so anyway, she's mother to all. She's such a sweet woman, you know, fierce but kind. And I mean, she took Gibbie in, right? Anyway. What do you say to Mother? My mother's not to be said about. The mother's not to be said about, answered Donald. She's one by herself and not like any other folk. You wouldn't think were an angel Gabriel had he just read Homer clean through, would you? I don't know what he's saying right here, but look. You can read it and write it in the comments if you understand what this is. Because sometimes I don't read ahead ever. Like, I've read this book many times, and heard it read by people that speak with the awesome Scottish accent. It's such a beautiful day. I'm glad to share this with you. That's what I was saying, is like, God put it on my heart to read, and I just figured someone might benefit from it. I know I look forward every time to be like, oh, thank God I can just let go of my mind and enter the story. So even if it's just that discipline, that exercise is so good for us. Because we're not our mind. We're not all these thoughts. We're not all our programs. We're not all our past mistakes. All my videos talk about that. If I did, answered Gibbie, he would only tell me there was time enough for that. When they met on a Friday evening and it was fine, they would rove the streets, Gibbie taking Donald to the places he knew so well in his childhood and enjoying it the more that he could now tell him so much better what he remembered. The only place he did not take him to was Jink Lane, with the house that had been Mistress Croale's. He did take him to the court in Whitty Hill and show him the old house of Galbraith, and the place under the stair where his father had worked. The shed was now gone. The neighbors had by degrees carried it away for firewood. The house was occupied still, as then, by a number of poor people, and the door was never locked, day or night, any more than when Gibbie used to bring his father home. He took Donald to the garret where they had slept, one could hardly say lived, and where his father died. The door stood open, and the place was just as they had left it. A year or two after, Gibbie learned how it came to be thus untenanted. It was said to be haunted. Every Sunday Sir George was heard at work, making boots for his wee Gibbie from morning to night, after which, when it was dark, came dreadful sounds of supplication, as of a soul praying in hellfire. For a while the house was almost deserted in consequence. Wow. Excuse me. Oh, I brought a handkerchief. I forgot. I put one in my bag. Because sometimes I tear up in the story and then my nose starts running. Because it's such a beautiful story. We're so fortunate to be able to have this. I thank God all the time for George MacDonald, for J.R. Tolkien, and for C.S. Lewis. And for, of course, Evelyn Underhill, that I read 60 plus hours, I think, of mysticism, studying the nature and development of spiritual consciousness. And all the artists that sing the songs that come to me. Well, I can't find the Kleenex, so I can use this. 1 second. I think I washed all this. I washed my sweatshirts and stuff that were in there. T-shirts. Okay. Given I was you, Sir Gilbert, said Donald, who now and then remembered Mr. Sclater's request that they had come down, and looking at the outside of the house, and espied a half-obliterated stone carving of the Galbraith arms. Given I was you, Sir Gilbert, I would ask Mr. Sclater to keep a sharp lookout for this. Mr. Sclater's in charge of his money. This first chance of buying back this house. It would be a great pity to see if it would go away before you get it. Sick tales as this house could tell. Such, not sick, it says S-I-C, but he's saying in Scottish or something. Such tales this house could tell. How am I to do that? Said that, Donald. Mr. Sclater would not mind me. The money's not mine yet, you know, said Gibbie. The siller is yours, Gibbie, answered Donald. It's yours as the kingdom of heaven's yours. It's only as you cannot just lay your hands upon it. Oh, there's these animals in there. I always wonder what they were. There's a family of some kind of animals. I just heard them squeaking. I can't ever tell what they are. Anyway. So Gibbie was given this inheritance, but he's not yet of age. So this Mr. Sclater, whose profession is a preacher, but he's not quite surrendered himself to Christ. You see in the story. But anyway, the sooner you let that Mr. Sclater know, and you know what you're about, the better. And believe me, when he comes to understand as you want this house kept, he'll not be just a day to go and get somebody or another about it. He's right on it when it comes to money. But anyway, Donald was right, for within a month the house was bought and certain necessary repairs began. Sorry, I'm used to talking again. I know you know what commenced is. I'm not translating the Scottish anymore. Sometimes on those evenings they took tea with Mistress Kroll, and it was a proud time with her when they went. That night, at least, the whiskey bottle did not make its appearance. Mrs. Sclater continued to invite young ladies to the house for Gibbie's sake, because she didn't want Gibbie to marry lower than his class. I'll try to cover the mic so that the wind doesn't get on it. And when she gave a party, she took care there should be a proportion of young people in it. But Gibbie, although of course kind and polite to all, did not much enjoy these gatherings. It began to trouble him a little that he seemed to care less for his kind than before, but it was only a seeming, and the cause of it was this: he was now capable of perceiving facts in nature and character which prevented real contact, and must make advances towards it appear as offensive as they were useless. I think he's saying, he knows more of the depth of people now. And these people just making these niceties and having these dinners and talking about clothes and just stupid things. Sometimes clothes are important to talk about, but, we'll see what George MacDonald shows us through us. But he did not love the less that he had to content himself until the kingdom should come nearer, with loving at a more conscious distance. By loving kindness and truth, he continued doing all he could to bring the kingdom whose end is unity. All of us will be united, and it says every knee will bow and tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Think of how good he was and how unifying he was. It will be a lovely day. Hence, he had come to restrain his manner. Nothing could have constrained his manners, which now, from the conventional point of view, were irreproachable. But if he did not so often execute a wild dance or stand upon one leg, the glow in his eyes had deepened, and his response to any advance was as ready and thorough, as frank and sweet as ever. Advance in the kingdom, right, of God. His eagerness was replaced by a stillness from which his eyes took all coldness, and his smile was as the sun breaking out in a gray day of summer, and turning all from doves to peacocks. In this matter, there was one thing worthy of note, common to Donald and him, who had the same divine teaching from Janet, the mother. Their manners to all classes were the same. They showed the same respect to the poor, the same ease with the rich. Sometimes rich people in power and authority and other doctors, because I'm a doctor, don't understand when I'm just at ease, or famous people or whatever. Because they're just the same. We all have these souls. And some people that are of the lowest class, God has enriched their souls to such end that the richest person on this earth would be embarrassed to stand next to them. It talks about it in Hebrews. I think around Hebrews chapter 13, or I don't know. In Hebrews it says that these people walked this earth in sackcloth and ashes and fasted for us. And they changed the whole consciousness of the world, but we are not even worthy of knowing that they existed almost. These people who were like Christ before Christ even came and did that for us, died for us, and rose for us. Anyway, I must confess, however, that before the session was over, Donald found it required all his strength of mind to continue to go to Mrs. Sclater's little parties. From kindness, she never asked him to her larger ones, and the more to his praise it was that he did not refuse one of her invitations. The cause was this. One bright Sunday morning in February, coming out of his room to go to church and walking down the path through the furniture, because he lived in a furniture store. There was a room in the back of this furniture store he was renting, right? Through the furniture. In a dreamy mood, he suddenly saw a person meeting him straight in the face. Such a queer little child, he remarked inwardly, stepped on one side to let him pass, and perceived it was himself reflected from head to foot in a large mirror which had been placed while he was out the night before. So he didn't know that was a mirror. He didn't look at himself, right? The courage with which he persisted after such a painful enlightenment in going into company in those same garments was right admirable and enviable, but no one knew of it until its exercise was long over, right? He had this Scottish garb that like part was his mom had made and part, I don't know, but it was just, it looked so awkward in what people were wearing, the fashion of that city. And Gibbie was made to wear. He was taken to a tailor and given all these fancy clothes. But Donald was like, nope, I'm going to wear the garb. But he never looked at it in the mirror, and he sees other people. So anyway, the little pocket money Mr. Sclater allowed Gibbie was chiefly spent at the shop of a certain second-hand bookseller, nearly opposite Mistress Murchison's, the furniture store, right, I think. The books they bought were carried to Donald's room, there to be considered by Gibbie Donald's, and by Donald Gibbie's, right? Among the rest was a reprint of Marlowe Faust's, in the daring one grand passage of which both awed and delighted them. There were also some of Ettrick Shepherd's eerie stories, alone in their kind, and above all, there was a miniature copy of Shelley, whose verse did much for the music of Donald's, while yet he could not quite appreciate the truth for the iridescence of it. Wow, I want to read Shelley. He said it seemed to him to have been all composed in a balloon. I have mentioned only works of imagination, but it must not be supposed they had not a relish for stronger food. The books more severe came afterwards, when they had liberty to choose their own labors. Now they had plenty of the harder work provided for them. Maybe in their schooling, I don't know. Somewhere about this time, Fergus Duff received his license to preach. Oh gosh, help us, Lord. Right? That there's still butterflies being made, this guy. And set himself to acquire what his soul thirsted after. So this isn't your soul, like some people say your soul is, people can be soulish, and that's their flesh in a spiritual form, your mind, will, and emotions, maybe. It's God is saving our soul, all right? So sometimes, that's funny because my website's called Your Soul Songs. They're songs to help heal our soul. Save my soul. Anyway, so his soul, the wrong part, thirsted after, let's see, a reputation, namely for eloquence. He wanted to be, have a reputation for being eloquent, right? This was all the flood mark that remained of the waters of verse with which he had at one time so plentifully inundated his soul. So he used to read verse. That was all that was left, is him wanting to be known to be eloquent. He was the same man as he had been as youth, handsome, plausible, occupied with himself, determined to succeed, not determined to labor. Praise was the very necessity of his existence, but he had the instinct not to display his beggarly hunger, which reached even to the approbation of such to whom he held himself vastly superior. He seemed generous and was niggardly by turns, cultivated suavity. Like, pretending to be suave. It was cultivated, indulged in floridity both of manners and speech, and signed his name as nobody could read it, though his handwriting was plain enough. In the spring, summer, and autumn, Donald labored all day with his body, and in the evening as much as he could with his mind. Lover of nature as he was, however, more alive, indeed, than before to the delights of the country and the genial companionship of terrene sights and sounds, scents and motions, he could not help longing for the winter and the city, that his soul might be freer to follow its paths. Okay, so I guess in the summer he'd go home and work again in the fields, Donald would. And Fergus's father is the one who owns the farm that Donald works and herds the cows. Anyway, and yet, what a season some of the labors of the field afforded him for thought. To the student who cannot think without books, the easiest of such labors are a dull burden or a distress. But for the man or woman, right, in whom the wells have been unsealed, in whom the waters are flowing, the labor mingles gently and genially with the thought, and the plow he holds with his hands lays open to the sun and the air more soils than one, right? You're entering into different realms of understanding. Mr. Sclater, without his books, would speedily have sunk into the mere shrewd farmer. Donald, never opening a book, would have followed theories and made verses to the end of his days. Wow. Wow. Every Saturday, as before, he went to see his father and mother. Janet kept fresh and lively, although age told on her, she said, more rapidly since Gibbie went away. Gibbie was living at that house. Maybe brought her youth back again, because she had to be like a young mom again. Anyway, but the good Lord let old age wither me up, she said. He'll look after the cracks himself. Anyway. 6 weeks of every summer between Donald's sessions, while the minister and his wife took their holiday, Gibbie spent with Robert and Janet. Oh wow, a month and a half, right? It was a blessed time for them all. He led then just the life of the former days with Robert and Oscar's their dog, and the sheep and Janet and her cow and the New Testament. Only he had a good many more things to think about now, and more ways of thinking about them. With his own hands, he built a neat little porch to the cottage door, which with close sides and a second door to keep the wind off. Donald and he carried up the timber and the mortar, but although he tried hard to make Janet say what he could do for her more, he could not bring her to reveal any desire that belonged to this world, except, indeed, for 2 or 3 trifles for her husband's warmth and convenience, because they had rheumatism or something. They'd get very cold in their joints in the winter. Anyway, the sight of my Lord's face, she said once when he was pressing her, is all I want, Sir Gibbie. For this life, it just bleaks me to think of anything I would have or would lose. This body of mine growing some heavy like, I must confess, but I wouldn't have taken off me for a time. I don't know what she's saying, having more. It would be an ill thing for the seed to be shaft over soon. So like the seed in us is meant to be, like I was saying, that butterfly. We're meant to go into the butterfly and turn into that. It's called theosis. It's all over the New Testament in the Greek, but not a lot of people preach on it. It's in Colossians 3:3 that says, "For you have died and your life is now hidden with Christ in God." And it says he's the author and finisher of your faith. And also in John 15, when Jesus is saying, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing." You're becoming something else. We're grafted into the vine that Jesus is. Grafted back in, let's say. We were growing off of that, and then Adam and Eve brought us off of that tree somehow. And then Christ made us a way to come back. But anyway, so she's saying, we have this, it's like a seed has the the acorn seed has the shell around it, but really the seed is what we are. But she's saying, you know, we have this body, we're in this body, and we don't want to let go of the body before God doesn't want us here anymore. Like always fight for your life. This is why I get so concerned about all these nursing homes and hospices, because they're so ready to shoo people off to death, and that's not of God. That's not okay. So I don't know if you feel called to pray against that, or pray for more insight or more change or something. They almost always called him Sir Gibbie, and he never objected or seemed either annoyed or amused at it. He took it just as the name that was his, the same way as his hair or his hands were his. He had been called wee Sir Gibbie for so long. Okay, so chapter XLIX. What is that? 49. Is that right? L is 50. And you subtract it. Okay. The houseless. Okay. The minister kept Gibbie hard at work. Hold on. I'm sitting on Leia's leash. Good girl. You can have your water. This bench is so funny without the slat. All right. The houseless. The minister kept Gibbie hard at work, you know, in his schooling. He was trying to tutor him. And by the time Donald's last winter came, Gibbie was ready for college also. Wow, I thought Gibbie was just doing under college. To please Mr. Sclater, he competed for a bursary and gained a tolerably good one, but declined accepting it. His guardian was annoyed. He could not see why he should refuse what he had earned. Gibbie asked him whether it was by the design of the founder of those bursaries that rich boys should have them. Were they not for the like of Donald, you know, who was very smart, but didn't have enough money for school, right? Whereupon Mr. Sclater could not help remembering what a difference it would have made to him in his early struggles if some rich bursar above him had yielded a place, and he held his peace. Go figure, right? Dower Street being too far from Elphinstone College for a student to live there, Mr. Sclater consented to Gibbie's lodging with Donald. Yay! But would have insisted on their taking rooms in some part of the town, more suitable to the young baronet's position, he said. But as there was another room to be had at Mistress Murkinson's, Gibbie insisted that one who had shown them so much kindness must not be forsaken. And by this time he seldom found difficulty in having his way with his guardian, right? He was kind and thoughtful and didn't ask for, you know, anything bad. And so he rented another room from Miss Murkinson's furniture shop. Both he and his wife had come to understand him better, and nobody could understand Gibbie better without also understanding better all that was good and true and right, although they hardly knew the fact themselves. The standard of both of them had been heightened by not a few degrees since Gibbie came to them, and although he soon ceased to take direct notice of what in their conduct distressed him, I cannot help thinking it was not amiss that he uttered himself as he did at the first. Knowing a little his ways of thinking, they came to feel his judgment unexpressed, right, in their house. When they started arguing, he brought the New Testament over to them and said, you know, be kind one to another, or whatever. It was like, live at peace if at all possible. All these things. Why are you looking at why are you not looking at the log? Jesus said, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's, right? And he didn't do it judgingly. He just did it like, wait, I don't understand why you both are fighting when you could be loving each other, right? I'm used to talking closer to the mic, but the mic's actually here, so I hope you still heard that. Anyway, to feel his judgment unexpressed. For Mrs. Sclater, when she bethought herself that she had said or done something he must count worldly, the very silence of the dumb boy was a reproof to her, right? Because he couldn't speak. But he had been reading Pilgrim's Progress. And there's worldly wise, and then there's this godly wisdom that's so much higher. One night the youths had been out for a long walk and came back to the city late, after the shops were shut. Only here and there a light glimmered in some low-browed little place, probably used in part by the family. Not a soul was visible in the dingy region, or the dingy, maybe dingy, I think dingy, D-I-N-G-Y, dingy region through which they now approached their lodging. When round a corner, moving like a shadow, came soft-pacing a ghostly woman in rags, with a white, worn face, and the largest black eyes, it seemed, to the youths that they had ever seen. An apparition of awe and grief and wonder. To compare a great thing to a small, she was, to their eyes, as a ruined, desecrated shrine, to the eyes of the saint's own peculiar worshipper. I may compare her to what I please, great or small, to a sapphire set in tin, to an angel with draggled feathers. For far beyond all comparison is that temple of the Holy Ghost in the desert, a woman in wretchedness and rags. She carried her puny baby, rolled hard in the corner of her scrap of black shawl. To the youths, a sea of trouble looked out of those wild eyes. As she drew near them, she hesitated, half stopped, and put out a hand from under the shawl, stretched out no arm, held out only a hand from the wrist, white against the night. Donald had no money. Gibbie had a shilling. The hand closed upon it, a gleam crossed the sad face, and a manner of thanks fluttered from the thin lips as she walked on her way. The youth breathed deep and felt a little relieved, but only a little. The thought of the woman wandering in the dark and the fog and the night was a sickness at their hearts. Was it impossible to gather such under the wings of any night-brooding hen? That Gibbie had gone through so much of the same kind of thing himself, because he was homeless for most of his childhood. He had a house to sleep in, but he just wandered the streets during the day. Anyway, himself, and had found it endurable enough, did not make her ease a whit the less pitiful in his eyes, and indeed it was widely, sadly different from his. Along the deserted street, which looked to Donald like a waterless canal backed by mounds of death and lighted by phosphorescent grave damps, they followed her with their eyes, the one living thing fading away from lamp to lamp, and when they could see her no farther, followed her with their feet. They could not bear to lose sight of her, but they kept just on the verge of vision, for they did not want her to know the espial of their love. Suddenly she disappeared, and keeping their eyes on the spot as well as they could, they found, when they reached it, a little shop with a red curtain half torn down across the glass door of it. A dim oil lamp was burning within. It looked like a rag shop, dirty and dreadful. There she stood, while a woman with a bloated face, looking to Donald like a feeder of hell swine, took from some secret hole underneath a bottle which seemed to Gibbie the very one his father used to drink from. His father died from drinking whiskey, right? Gibbie's did. He would have rushed in and dashed it from her hand, but Donald withheld him. Wow. That's good to know he wanted to do that. There's so many people that I know that are addicted, and you just want to take the addiction out of their hands, but you can't. You have to just keep working on, the ones in your own eye, the addictions you didn't realize you were addicted to that have kept you bound in this world and not walking in your authority, like Jesus talks about in Luke 10:19. Hoots, he said, we cannot follow her at night, and given we did, the better how would she be better in the morning? Let her be, poor thing. She received the whiskey in a broken teacup, swallowed some of it eagerly, then, to the horror of the youths, put some of it into the mouth of her child from her own. Draining the last drops from the cup, she set it quietly down, turned, and without a word spoken, for she had paid beforehand, came out, her face looking just as white and thin as before, but having another expression in the eyes of it. At the sight, Donald's wisdom forsook him. "Ah, woman," he cried, yon wasn't what he gave the shilling for." "You said nothing," answered the poor creature humbly, and walked on, hanging her head and pressing her baby to her bosom. You didn't tell me what I could spend the shilling on, right? But anyway. The boys looked at each other. That wasn't the gift, your shilling that had gone, Gibbie, said Donald. It's clear it wasn't good to give a shilling to such like as her. What knows you but the hunger and the cold and the want of whiskey, but the woman's evil things here, as she may escape the hellfire of the rich man hereafter. I don't know what he's saying, but there's a parable that Jesus tells of a rich man who just eats and drinks, and there's a poor man on his gate, and his name was Lazarus as well, and he didn't, not the Lazarus that Jesus rose from the dead, a different Lazarus, and he wouldn't feed him his stuff, or I don't know if he just ate scraps that were out there or whatever, but he was in heaven, and this man died and went to hell afterwards, and he's like, please, could he just bring me a drop of water from Abraham's bosom? He could see him. And then he said, no, the chasm can't be crossed. And then Jesus is still telling the story. And he says, well, then at least tell my brothers of this place so they don't end up here. I don't want my brothers to end up in hell like me. And he said, the prophets have already spoken to them. Even if one rises from the dead, like Jesus would like a year later, when if they don't believe the prophets, they won't believe him anyway. And so that wasn't the good of your shilling, said he again to Gibbie. I think that's what he's saying. Here, you can translate it for us in the comments. I'd appreciate it. It's clear it wouldn't go a shilling to that such as like her, what knows but hunger and the cold and want of whiskey. Maybe the woman's evil things here, and she might escape the hellfire of the rich man hereafter. Oh yeah, maybe all the hunger and the cold, maybe she knows that now, because then she's not pulled in like the rich man, and she's going to have heaven afterwards. But anyway, he stopped, for Gibbie was weeping. The woman and her child he would have taken to his very heart, and could do nothing for them. Love seemed helpless, for money was useless. It set him thinking much, and the result appeared. From that hour, the case of the homeless haunted his heart and brain and imagination. And as his natural affections found themselves repelled and chilled in what is called society, they took refuge more and more with the houseless and hungry and shivering. Right? Sometimes they say that I was listening one night, it was like midnight or 10 or something, and I was asking God, what's my purpose here? And I turned on the radio, and I really believe God had a hand in this. And I know I wrote it down at the time. Some guy was just preaching or teaching or something on the radio, and he said that your purpose is often what breaks your heart, right? What broke your heart in childhood, what still breaks your heart. And so your mess becomes your message, right? Your test becomes your testimony. Here, Gibbie grew up so cold often nights, and just trusting. He wasn't angry about it. He just thought that's the way the world was. But now he wanted to take care of the shivering. Through them also, he now for the first time began to find grave and troublous questions mingling with his faith and hope, so that already he began to be rewarded for his love. To the true heart, every doubt is a door. Oh, wow. Thank you, God. I have so many doors this morning. I will not follow and describe the opening of these doors to Gibbie, but as what he discovered found always its first utterance in action, wait until I can show the result. For the time, the youths were again a little relieved about the woman, following her still to a yet more wretched part of the city. They saw her knock at a door, pay something, and be admitted. It looked a dreadful refuge, but she was at least under cover and shelter, and such a climate as ours in winter must be the first rudimentary notion of salvation. Wow, if someone says they're hungry, don't just say, well, be saved in Jesus' name. Put a jacket on them or something, right? Give them food. No longer haunted with the idea of her wandering all night about the comfortless streets, like a ghost awake in Memphis. Memphis in Egypt? It's not Memphis, Tennessee, that's for sure. This is the 1800s. Anyway, Donald said they went home, but it was long before they got to sleep. And in the morning, their first words were about the woman. "Given only we had my mother here," said Donald. "Mightn't you try Mr. Sclater?" suggested Gibbie. Donald answered with a great roar of laughter. "He would tell her she ought to take shame to herself," he said. "And I'm thinking she's long brunt her stock of that firing." Wow. She's already way, way, way ashamed of herself. Mr. Sclater is the preacher that does not understand where these people are coming from. He would tell her she should work for her living, and maybe there in a turn the poor thing can do at anybody would give her a baby for a day of whatever. And no one would give her money while she has the baby, I guess. "But what say ye to taking advice of Miss Galbraith?" Taking the advice of Miss Galbraith. It was strange how, with the marked distinctions between them, Donald and Gibbie would every now and then, like the daughters of the vicar of Wakefield, I haven't read that, seem to change places and parts. "God can make praise pipes of babes and sucklings," answered Gibbie, "but it does not follow that they can give advice. Don't you remember your mother saying that the stripling, David, was enough to kill a braggart giant?" Right? David took out Goliath, the giant, in the book of... What is that book? Is it in Samuel? Because Samuel was the prophet at that time. He anointed David. Right? And so David took him out with a slingshot because he knew that God had rescued his own sheep that he'd taken care of as stewards of those sheep of God. They're all God's. Everything is God's. So if you treat everything as if it's God's, you want to treat everyone with respect and dignity. You're just a steward of it. And he saw how God rescued him and helped him take the sheep out of a lion's mouth or a bear's or whatever. He's like, what? This uncircumcised Philistine, he's going down. He doesn't get to mock the living God, the God we serve, right? And so, anyway, I'm just praying about David this morning to God, not, just about him. Give us the heart of David. That stripling David was enough to kill a braggart giant, but a sore-tired man was wanted to rule the people. Sore-tried. Saul, they were all hiding in their tents, and they tried to give him their armor, but they weren't fighting. They needed the armor inside of the heart after God, right? The change has to happen spiritually first, people say. It ended in their going to Mistress Croll. They did not lay bare to her the perplexities, but they asked her to find out who the woman was and see if anything could be done for her. They said to themselves she would know the condition of such a woman and what would be moving in her mind after the experience she had herself had, better at least than the minister or his lady wife. Right? Because they had cocky leaky soup and they turned Mistress Croll away, and she was a friend of Gibbie's that helped him some in childhood, but also fed his father whiskey, so she was part of his demise. But he would have got it to a worse place, I know, but it doesn't matter. I mean, she ought to have. Nor were they disappointed. To be thus taken into counsel revived for Mistress Croll the time of her dignity, while yet she shepherded her little flock of drunkards, right? She felt like she was their shepherd and, wanted them to drink respectfully, even though they were drinking themselves to any addiction we feed in our flesh controls us. Paul said that. Sin, anyone who sins is a slave to sin. Jesus said something the like as well. She undertook the task with hearty goodwill and carried it out with some success. Its reaction on herself to her own good was remarkable. There can be no better auxiliary against our own sins than to help our neighbor in the encounter with his. Merely to contemplate our neighbor will recoil upon us in quite another way. We'll be all proud and be like that man that Jesus talked about, when two people went into the temple and one said, "Oh, I'm so glad I'm not like that tax collector and person over there." And that person was beating his chest and saying, "God, have mercy on me. I'm a sinner. Forgive me all," right? And Jesus asked the people he was teaching, which one of the two went home forgiven? You know, the one that actually asked God to forgive them, not trying to prop up our own egotism, our own false personality self. Anyway. So auxiliary is taking care of your neighbor. Merely to contemplate the neighbor or our neighbor will recoil upon us in quite another way. We shall see his faults so black that we will not consent to believe ours so bad, and will immediately begin to excuse, which is the same as to cherish our own faults, right? To cherish them, instead of casting them from us with abhorrence, casting all of it from us, right? One day earlier, in this session, as the youths were approaching the gate of Miss Kimball's school, a thin, careworn man in shabby clothes came out and walked along meeting them. Every now and then he bowed his shoulders as if something invisible had leaped upon them from behind, and as often seemed to throw it off and with effort walk erect, right? It was the laird. They lifted their eyes, but in return he only stared, or rather tried to stare, for his eyes seemed able to fix themselves on nothing. He was now at length a thoroughly ruined man, and had come to the city to end his days in a cottage belonging to his daughter, right? So she was at her own finishing type of school that he had paid for ahead of time. And he had to sell the house, I guess. I don't know, we'll see. So he's in this cottage. His wife had lots of money, so the cottage belonged to his daughter, I guess. Already Mr. Sclater, who was unweariedly on the watch over the material interest of his ward, had, through his lawyer and without permitting his name to appear, purchased the whole of Glashruach property. For the present, however, he kept Sir Gilbert in ignorance of the fact. That's awesome. Okay, and so that is all the land. And it's funny because Robert and Janet work for the laird and the laird's land, the lord of the land there. And now they work for Gibbie, and Gibbie doesn't even know them, because with his money, Mr. Sclater was worldly wise enough to know to purchase that so it could go back to his inheritance, because he's a Gilbraith. All right. Chapter L, that's 50. Okay, so that's correct. And we have about 8 more minutes. The cottage to which Mr. Galbraith had taken Ginevra stood in a suburban street, one of those small, well-built stone houses common, I fancy, throughout Scotland, with 3 rooms and a kitchen on its one floor and a large attic with dormer windows. It was low and wide-roofed and had a tiny garden between it and the quiet street. This garden was full of flowers in summer and autumn, but the tops of a few gaunt stems of hollyhocks and the wiry straggling creepers of the honeysuckle about the eaves was all that now showed from the pavement. It had a dwarf wall of granite with an iron railing on the top, through which, in the season, its glorious colors used to attract many eyes. But Mr. Galbraith had the railing and the gate lined to the very spikes with boards. Ew, that's too bad. The first day of his abode, he had discovered that the passerby, not to say those who stood to stare admiringly at the flowers, came much too near his faded, but nonetheless conscious dignity, right? He had none left, but he had it in his own mind. He had also put a lock on the gate, and so made the garden a sort of propylon to the house. Well, I don't know what a propylon. If you know what it is, feel free to write it in the comments. For he had of late developed a tender tendency towards taking to earth, like the creatures that seem to have been created, ashamed of themselves, and are always burrowing. Wow. But it was not that the late laird was ashamed of himself in any proper sense. You see how he ought to be. He gambled away his daughter's money and his widow, he's a widow, his dead wife's inheritance. Of the dishonesty of his doings he was as yet scarcely half conscious, for the proud man shrinks from repentance, regarding it as disgrace. To wash is to acknowledge the need of washing. Oh God, wash us clean. Help us stay in humility. Help us see our errors and just cast them off, bring them to you, Lord. Forgive us all our sins that we've done, knowingly and unknowingly. Forgive us all, Lord. Help us bring every shame to you, and that we may turn from any wickedness. In Jesus' name, amen. He avoided the eyes of men for the mean reason that he could no longer appear in dignity as Laird of Glashruach and chairman of a grand company, while he felt as if something must have gone wrong with the laws of nature, that it had become possible for Thomas Galbraith of Glashruach, Esquire, to live in a dumpy cottage. He had thought seriously of resuming his patronym of Durrant, his last name. He took on his wife's last name because hers was more famous or, high, but reflected that he was too well known to don that cloak of transparent darkness without giving currency to the idea that he had soiled the other past longer wearing, the other name, Galbraith. It would be imagined, he said, picking out one dishonesty of which he had not been guilty, that he had settled money on his wife and retired to enjoy it. That's what it looked like to them, I guess. His condition was far more pitiful than his situation. Wow, his interior condition, right? I said at the beginning, right, this could totally transform and help and change us. I said that at the beginning of the last video. I said it a little bit differently this time, but having no faculty for mental occupation except with affairs, finding nothing to do but cleave, like a spent sailor with hands and feet to the slippery rock of what was once his rectitude, such as it was, trying to hold it still his own, he would sit for hours without moving, a perfect creature, temple, God, and worshipper, all in one, only that the worshipper was hardly content with his God, and that a worm was gnawing on the foundation of the temple, right? He wasn't worshiping G-O-D with a capital G. It's a little G-O-D. And, he couldn't keep propping that up. Nearly as motionless, her hands accepted, would Ginevra sit opposite to him, not quieter, but more peaceful than when a girl, partly because now she was less afraid of him. He called her in his thoughts as he sat there, heartless and cold. But not only was she not so, but it was his fault that she appeared to him such, right? If you cut off your own emotions, you imagine other people are cut off from you and you see them through your eyes instead of the heart eyes, right? In his moral stupidity, he would rather have seen her manifest concern at the poverty to which he had reduced her than show the stillness of a contented mind, right? She was contented. She was not much given to books, but what she read was worth reading, and such as turned into thought, excuse me, while she sat. Excuse me. Oof. They're not the best students who are most dependent on books. What can be got out of them is at best only material, and man must build his house for himself. Jesus says, build your house on the rock, and then it will stand, this rock of Jesus Christ. If you build it on the sand, when the storm comes and the wind comes, that house will fall down. Maybe I'll do a teaching on that. I just read about that in my commentary from the 1100s. There's a hawk over there flying. She would have read more, but her father beside her doing nothing, she felt that to take a book would be like going into a warm house and leaving him out in the cold. It was very sad to her to see him thus shrunk and withered and lost in thought that plainly was not thinking. Nothing interested him. He never looked at the papers, never cared to hear a word of news, which is probably better, that part, but his eyes, yes, to take care of other people. His eyes more unsteady, his lips looser, his neck thinner and longer. He looked more than ever like a puppet whose strings hung slack. How often would Ginevra have cast herself onto his bosom if she could have even hoped he would not repel her, right? She wanted him to hold her and give her a hug and hug him. Now and then, his eyes did wander to her in a dazed sort of animal-like appeal, but the moment she attempted response, he turned into a corpse. Still, when it came, that look was a comfort, for it seemed to witness some bond between them after all. And another comfort was that now, in his misery, she was able, if not, to forget those painful thoughts about him which had all these years haunted her, at least to dismiss them when they came, in the hope that, as already such a change had passed upon him, farther and better change might follow. So he had Gibbie whipped for nothing, when he was a boy. But you can listen about it. Anyway, it looks like, oh, I don't know where we started. Let's see. I don't know. Maybe we have 2 more hours left of reading. It just looks so little compared to what we've read, but we've read, I don't know how many hours we are at now. Much love. Thanks for being here. Make sure to share with like-minded or people that can get this or might get it. All right, much love to you. Be blessed.